Afropolitan, where we have like designers, different designers with fashion shows, dance groups, and also our committee this year has been like really working super hard to, I guess, tap in as well with like Harlem and like going to different restaurants and showing some students like what the African community looks like around here as well. So I think from you all, we just want to keep the connection more consistent, like having more things like this. So thank you so much, Haley, for connecting us and just allowing our community to pick y'all's brains and get to know you better. Thank you.
Say, Nettie, can we ask you a question? So is your event this Saturday, your big event, is this going to be taped or video available for anyone to see?
I don't think we have like an official videographer, sadly. I think there'll be photos, but yeah, not a videographer.
Okay.
But we'll send those out.
Hello, I'm Yanni. I'm the treasurer for the BSO. If I could say what the BSO has been trying to do this year, it's really reestablishing community that might not have been felt during the pandemic due to a lot of students being at home or in different places, different continents. And so the BSO has really been trying to get back to in-person programming, but also traditional programming that we've been doing. So for example, our Kwanzaa Ball that we held in December, and also our Black graduation that we held every year in the spring for Black graduating seniors. If I could say what BSO is looking for from connections with the alumni community and connections with older alumni especially, is that institutional knowledge that comes from having been at Columbia, having pretty much dealt with Columbia and some of the stuff that Columbia tries to pull sometimes, and also that strength that comes from that understanding. And I feel those bonds can be grown and reconnected, because over the years, I think it's become a little bit more difficult, but I think it's always true that, you know, everybody has each other's back. So I think that's just what we're trying to get back to. So thank you for coming today, and yeah.
I'm a little short. But hi, everyone. I am the treasurer of BOSS, the broader organization of So in Solidarity. My name is Janelle Matias. And this year, we've been tasked with a lot of things. One, like everyone else has said, rebuilding community has been a big part of it. I feel like, you know, participation or like membership during the pandemic and like that transition online really was hard for a lot of us, and we're all just dealing with so much during the pandemic. So we really made it a priority to like rebuild that leadership and bond with each other while we're on campus, and just provide not only a safe space, but a space where people feel listened to, valued to on campus for Black women, Black non-binary students, Black trans students on campus. And I feel like we've really gotten to a point where we all feel really comfortable with each other, and like we really feel supported. So I think something that we like took on this year that was really big was probably the renovation of the Zeronial Hurston Lounge. Due to like some stuff over the pandemic, our lounge needed to be like refurnished. Just we felt like we needed something new. We needed something that Black students on campus loved, like as their space, and like had input. So we spent a lot of time working on that, and that has been a really big task because of like administration, like discretion, and dealing with like bureaucracy on Barnett's campus and with like the larger Columbia community. So I think what we're looking for as in support is we've been talking about how we want to structure our advisory for the next year. We definitely want a lot more input from alumni, not only from BOSS, but just like Black alumni in the Barnett community, in the Columbia community. We want to get more political again, organize on campus, and we want to make sure that people see the like renovation of the Zeronial Hurston Lounge coming in the next year, and be able to really utilize that space as a community space for everyone. So yeah.
So Haley, let me ask another question. Do you all have a formal or an association or a group in which you are able to get together and speak with one voice on the issues that you wish to, or that confront you at times, that gives a little bit more strength to what you have to say? Do you
Yeah,
have a steering committee?
yeah, there's an organization on campus called MAD, which is the Mobilized African Diaspora. And that's a group where if issues arise on campus or when they do, there'll be discussions with MAD, and MAD will create certain demands. There's a couple demands that are out right now that I can definitely share with you guys, just so you know kind of some of the stuff that Black students are asking for on campus in general. But thank you to all the Black orgs that are here. We are also joined by Professor Frank Garritti, who is the Director of Undergraduate Studies for the African American Diaspora Studies Department. And he's also teaching a class about Columbia in 1968. So I'm just gonna bring him up super quickly just to introduce himself, and then we'll get started with the program.
Thank you all. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Haley, and thanks to all of you for coming and putting together this great event. Hello, 68ers, alums. Great to see you again. So as Haley said, Professor Frank Garritti, I'm in the Department of History and in African American and African Diaspora Studies. And I've devoted a significant part of my pedagogy to exposing students to the extraordinary activism of Black student activists on this campus, particularly in the 1968 protests, and all Columbia students, actually. The class really is designed to get students aware of that history of activism, not just to learn about it, but then to conduct research on it as well, right? So to sort of connect what the issues of the late 60s, early 70s to what we're seeing today around policing, around racism on campus, around the university's expansionist policies towards Harlem, among other topics. So a couple of the students in the class are on the Zoom here. So I just wanted to say hello, welcome, look out for the class in the future. I'm not teaching it next year, but I'll probably teach the year after. And I'm contributing in a small way to, again, highlighting this history and encouraging and empowering students to do research on it and do actions today, right? And I think to some degree, the graduate student strike of last semester is an example of the kind of activist legacies that we saw carried out. And we're still seeing strikes on campus now. So anyways, I'm just delighted to be here. I'm just gonna get out of the way and observe, participate, and thank you all for having me here. Thank you.
So thank you again. We're gonna start off now with just a high level overview of what happened in 1968, just in case some students aren't sure, and just also for you guys to revisit what happened. So if I could have a representative speak to that, and I'll pin you so everyone will be able to see it.
Cicero, are you there?
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to you. Can you hear me?
I can hear
I
you.
can hear you. Yeah, I can't see you.
All right.
So we'd like to toss this to you to begin us.
Well, Marvin, you might want to tell them a little bit about what Cicero was to us, who he was at the
Well,
time.
Cicero was the elected president or chair, I forgot the title,
President, yeah.
president of the, what we call SAS,
Yes.
Students African American Society.
Students African American Society.
Afro-American Society, actually, I think we were then. And in terms of our participation and presence in the takeover, he was one of the main spokespersons and representatives, I guess, of us, as I said, being probably the only elected leader, but there was a whole cadre of leadership that kind of guided us through that experience, many of whom are on the call here today. But Cicero, if we could ask you to kind of begin with some of your reflections and kind of recollections of how we got into that mess.
Well, wait, let me just start. Because if I start punching buttons, my connection is shaky. That's what's
Uh,
going on now. So it seems to have straightened out a little bit. Well, first of all, thank you all for the invitation to communicate with you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can
Yeah.
hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This was a protest that began in the midst of a lot of in the late 60s. Everyone knows it was moving at that time. So war in Vietnam, in a way of background, you know that there was a little on this campus toward Blackness. I won't say that everyone was hostile, but there were certain things that made it.
Cicero, do we have a chance to get you
Made us
connected better?
Very
Yeah.
aware that we
Can't
were
hear you well.
Cicero, your audio is very.
Yeah, we're having a
They're
real
bad.
significant
Okay.
difficulty with lag, and I was wondering, is it possible for us to get you connected better or to rejoin or?
Let me see
Hi,
if I
it might be
can
helpful if you turn off your
rejoin.
camera.
Yeah, sometimes that works. Yeah, turn off your camera.
All right, let me.
We all can go on
see where
mute.
this is.
Yeah, that could help too sometimes.
I think I'm gonna have to go out and come back in.
We can hear you now. Clearly,
Now you can hear me,
yeah.
but all this other stuff is going on too.
But we hear your voice, so if
We hear
you
you clearly.
continue your narrative, we know what you look like. You know. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Well, don't worry about your camera. If you could just continue with your narrative, because we can
All
hear
right, well, okay, essentially what was critical about this period of time was that there were two groups on campus. And my election basically was as the consensus candidate. There were students who wanted to be more involved and more active in the political environment and in Harlem. And there were those that felt that our responsibility, both to ourselves and to our futures and to our families, was to get through Columbia, to be good students, graduate, and go on into professional areas where we could help others and help our community. At that time, SDS was protesting the war and the presence of a defense contractor on campus. And that set the stage for a lot of turmoil on the campus. During the same period of time, Columbia University announced that it was going to seek permission to appropriate land in Morningside Park to build a more convenient gymnasium for Columbia. That caused a stir because it was public land and it was going to be used by a private institution. But what really lit the fuse was that they proposed having a separate entrance for Harlem and having that entrance lead into a part of the building that was walled off from the rest of the building. And the reason for this was that they were going to have guns from the ROTC program in the building, and they did not want Harlem residents to have access to the passages that would lead to those guns. But in effect, what they had done was set up a backdoor for Harlem. This was, in the opinion of most of the Black students on campus, really a callous disregard of the Harlem community and of Black people in general. And I should say, this was not the community building. Many students were involved with tutoring, working with the West Harlem organization. Leon Denmark was following a lot of the political movements in Harlem at the time, and was keeping us abreast of what was going on and telling us about opportunities for us to contribute our time and talent. in Harlem, but it became a moral dilemma. Do we, as members of the Columbia University community, sit by while they build a backdoor for Harlem, basically a racist architectural plan, or do we ignore it and go about our business as students? And most of us felt that we could not ignore this, that this was too much of an affront. And while we fought for ourselves when we were asked for IDs, when 20 white students would walk in front of us and enter without having to show ID, and then we would come to the door and we would have to show ID, we would fight for ourselves. But this was different. This was about Black people in general and Harlem in particular. So we joined the fight against the gymnasium in partnership with SDS around the opposition to the war. And
They may not know SDS, Cicero, so Students for a
Student Democratic Society. Yeah, and they tended to be on the radical end of the anti-war movement. Just to give you an example of some of the leadership there, one of their members after the protest, about a month after, ended up blowing himself up in a townhouse because he was trying to, rig explosives to take the protest to a different level. Clearly, the Black students were in the Martin Luther King civil disobedience camp. And as a result of that, when the protest began, we marched, to the site of the gymnasium where they were undertaking construction. And we then decided that we were going to basically sit in at Hamilton Hall. When white students started stepping over us with smiles on their faces, basically disregarding the issue, it was decided at that point that we were going to close the building and make them pay attention to the issue. And that's when the protest really started. At that time, students on the Columbia campus and the Barnard campus heard about what was going on and came into the building. I think there may have been 10 to 20 people at the beginning. And by the end, just about, I'd say 90% of the Black students at Barnard and Columbia College were in the building participating in the protest. This was not part of our community involvement. It was not community building. It was not asset building where we were helping people with housing issues or setting up educational programs and tutorial programs. This was about Columbia's callous, racist disregard of the Black community, and we were not going to have it. And as a result of that, the protests mounted, and clearly we had to be very deliberate and purposeful about the steps we took. And I guess we'll get into more of that later on in the discussion, but I hope that's enough of a background so that you understand this wasn't planning a community building event. This was a protest against a racist action. And we knew that this would involve the potential for expulsion, the potential for arrest, the potential for personal harm, and all of that had to be weighed against what our families expected of us. Many of us were first generation college, many were nutrition because their mothers or fathers were lawyers. So there was a our families with us being here into our communities back home. While I went to school on Long Island, my family's homestead was 129th Street between Lenox and 5th. And while at Columbia, my family still had a large number of people living on 129th Street. And so I took this back door to Harlem particularly hard since I considered that part of my family home. Maybe I should stop there so I don't.
I think one other thing we should probably add, Cicero, was that this occurred about 2 weeks after the assassination of Dr. King. And so that emotions were running high in the community. And the issue of protests starting on the West Coast and then coming to Columbia were new and strong, and at least the stage was well set for that.
Okay, is there anyone else who has a comment on just the background or the environment? Carolyn, you want to kind of unmute?
Unmute, Carolyn.
Trying. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I just want to say this just to give you a flavor of the time, because it was a very, very radical time. The SDS student that blew himself up, that was the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I know the city was very afraid that Harlem would explode. And they had this corps of policemen, the tactical police force, that were known for just beating, cracking skulls and really hurting people. In fact, they're the people who arrested us, and the Black politicians protected us. And when we got in jail, all the white students had cracked heads and stuff. I mean, it was really, we were not touched because they thought Harlem would blow up. But I remember in the last gathering we had was the 40th anniversary, and someone mentioned that because we had Stokely Carmichael came in and Rap Brown and Julius Lester, and somebody commented, they said, yeah, Julius Lester came in with this big duffel bag. It was full of rifles. This is after the Cornell students had marched out of their building with these bandoleros on. So it was a very, some of us, I think, I had not a clue that there were guns in there, because I stayed in there a whole week. I was scared to death if I had known that, most of us. So it was just a kind of environment that all kinds of things were happening. And it was just, we were kind of naive because we also had a couple of people who were former felons. I remember this one guy that was sort of walking around in all black with a beret, and he had the feeling that we didn't know what we were doing. So he was there to kind of protect us. And when we got arrested, we made sure that all the people that had records were out. So we didn't want them to get arrested again. But it was, the whole country was, things like that were happening. And it's so different from today. Because it's things, this is a period of kind of retreating from some of the gains that we've made, but it was kind of exciting to be involved in that. And I remember too, when we marched to the gym, and this is something I also found out at our last anniversary, they were putting up this fence to fence off the part of Morningside Park that would have the gym. And the police were there, and the police were beginning to act up. And one of the students grabbed the policeman's arm, he had a gun and everything, grabbed his arm and kind of pushed him away. And it was I think there's some photographs actually of that. So it was actually like a bit of a little tussle between the students and the police. So, I mean, we had a couple of close calls there, I think. I don't know if anyone else had, seen anything, but I was kind of oblivious to a lot of the stuff that was going on. Yeah.
Anyone else I would just say also that speaking of Harlem exploding, on the night that it was revealed Dr. King was assassinated, there was a riot in Harlem. Okay, I can personally testify to that. Because, I mean, Harlem is just down the street. And even though,
Yeah.
you know, Columbia appears to be in a world unto itself,
Yeah.
actually Columbia is in the Harlem community.
Yeah.
There was a period of time when it renamed, Morningside Heights renamed itself out of Harlem,
Yeah.
but looking at older maps,
Mhm.
you know, that whole area was legal and officially a part of the Harlem community. So even
Yeah.
though they took themselves out, they were
Mhm.
always in. And, you know, we'll all remember freshman week when we got there, the warning we got was, by all means, beware of the subway you ride. Make certain that at 96th Street, you get on the express and not the local, on the local and not
Local,
the
not the
express.
express.
So if you get on the local, you know, if you get on the express, you will wind up at 116th and Lenox Avenue,
Yeah.
which,
Yes.
you know, from Columbia's perspective was not to be desired.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else who has any background recollections before we go into the actual event?
Yeah, I do. I'd like somebody to speak on basically the atmosphere at school during the year, because there was a buildup and hostilities. Remember the Spectator and the,
Yeah.
the
Yes.
racist cartoons they used to put out? There was a lot of interesting conflicts between the Black students, the athletes, all the, many of the, I mean, Larry, Cicero, a lot of the guys there were athletes, and they weren't allowed to play in certain positions on the football team. They were sat on the bench even though they were real stars in high school. There was a lot of ugly things going on that I think ultimately over time built up till everybody was kind of like pissed off, and to put it plainly. But perhaps some of the guys could speak on that.
The Spectator thing was big because they had put this picture. It was one of the fraternities was being set up at Columbia, right? Wasn't that
It
what?
was Omegas, weren't they?
Omegas,
Weren't they
right.
Qs?
This was actually
Yeah,
we
and the
called it the
Spectator.
Jester.
Yeah,
It
they
was
put a
the
picture of
Jester, right.
Kabaka in
Spectator. The
Uganda.
Spectator was
What?
okay.
Yeah, they had a photograph of the Kabaka in Uganda and said the brothers of Booby Dooby Doo are
Booga
forming a
Booga.
fraternity.
Something, yeah.
And then somebody, I don't want to call any names, but I think I know one of the people. All of those spectators disappeared.
Now they
All
were
the
just,
newspapers disappeared. I
they
think,
were jesters, and we
yeah,
actually
right, the jester,
had a
that's
group
true.
that went over and had a conversation with the editors,
Yes.
and we just kind of convinced them of the wisdom of donating those magazines
Yeah,
to the community.
yeah,
And so they relinquished the magazine. They saw the wisdom.
yes.
We have quite a large delegation.
It was just an alternative distribution system using the Hudson River.
It was the Hudson River, yes.
Yeah, and actually
Don't
a
forget
lot of
the
them just
vigil
kind of
outside Ferris Booth.
mysteriously wound
Yes.
it up in a bonfire out in front of Ferris Booth Hall.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and some of those copies exist to this day. I have one around the
I
house
think
somewhere.
I have one
I
too.
hope somebody could find it, because it would be nice if the students could see that
Yeah.
and let them
yeah.
know what the atmosphere was like. It was very hostile.
Mhm.
There were a lot of people who, like Cicero said, not everyone was hostile, but there were a lot of hostile folks, and they didn't present a welcoming environment at all. So we really felt that we were kind of up against it and had to come together to really bond in order to survive and support each other.
Well, that was
I think Cynthia
particularly
Belton
true for
posted
some
a
of us.
copy of it on the Facebook page.
Hey, Francis.
Hi, I think that Cynthia Belton posted a copy on the Facebook page.
Great.
I was going to say that some of the hostility, the athletes particularly noticed because we were teammates. And sometimes when you faced your teammates, out, they were making lines that we had to cross, or otherwise, they were not friendly. Those people who had been quote unquote your friends, all of a sudden were your enemies or antagonists. And so that during that time, with regard to the Hamilton Hall, the things changed a lot, at least early on, that you had to confront. But in sticking to it, they changed back, perhaps, but we experienced a number of issues.
Okay, if we could
Could you
move on.
date the, I just wanted someone to give an idea of when the Jester incident occurred. Was that the year prior?
No, I believe it was that year.
Same year, I think.
Yeah, it was the same year. It was earlier. I think it was between Christmas holidays and
Honestly, though, I don't think so. I think it was the previous year. Why? Because
Yes, it was the previous
I
year,
think it was
because I
previous,
can remember,
yes.
I can remember us coming back to campus after several articles had appeared. One of the reporters for The Spectator was a roommate of one of the Black students and wanted to talk off the record, and then wrote an article just as we were leaving for the summer. And I can remember the strong urge all summer to punch him in the face as soon as I saw him in the fall. But let me say this so the students, understand the context of this. When we showed up on campus, the class of 70, it was the largest number of Black students admitted into Columbia College. And I think there was a similarly large group at Barnard. I think it was maybe 22, 21. But the clear issue from the beginning, we went to what they called a mixer. I don't know whether they still have them, but we went to a mixer. A white girl smiled at Lenny Gunther. I did not know Lenny. I did not know the 7 or 8 other Black students that were at this mixer. And 2 guys approached Lenny like they wanted to punch him. And all 8 Black men in that room walked over and we said, how you doing, brother? Do you have a problem here? And Lenny said, no, I don't think I have a problem. And then he looked at the white guy and asked him, do I have a problem? From that moment on, we knew we were not going to mixers for social interaction. And Omega Psi Phi fraternity was initiated as an alternative to white mixers. We wanted contact with other Black students at other universities in New York City. And that was the purpose of doing that. And we were criticized. We were discussed at Howard University. We were discussed at Morehouse. Were Black students at Columbia resegregating? So this was not I mean, I can laugh about it and laugh about how it was resolved and those copies ended up in the Hudson River. But this was a serious issue of social isolation that we were combating by bringing a Black fraternity to campus. After we started, we found out that there had been an Alpha chapter at Columbia that had gone dormant, and they reactivated that. But the whole purpose of that was to bring our students into contact with students, especially from City College.
Yeah.
And that was basically a self-empowerment move on the social front. It was not just, we want to belong to a fraternity. I joined because it was a political move. I remember that mixer and I said, no, this is not, I'm from New York. This is not social life in New York for Black and brown people. So understand that even the establishment of that chapter was a political statement because of the social hostility that was present on the campus at that time.
I think maybe we should move back a little bit to Hamilton Hall and maybe go over how it became really a Black protest, as opposed to initially starting out with SDS and Black students from the different schools. And it wound up where there were SDS was elsewhere, and the whys and of that, I think are important to understand, because that, of course, gives a lot more legitimacy to what we were doing. And Cicero, I think you were very much involved in that decision-making process in asking our friends and colleagues to leave.
I wanted to give a little background piece before you move to that.
Okay.
A couple of things were stated. Cicero said that 90% of the Barnard women or girls, whatever we were called back then, joined in. And Jackie's on this call, wasn't there, but did some running. Our class, as you say, in 70 did, what do you call it, multiply. My class of 69, there were only, we figured a dozen of us. Lois, I think you and I agreed the two of us were in that building. I was briefly there. But out of that, the biggest percentage of Barnard women came from classes after ours. And I also want to state that a lot of people, I had been the secretary for Students African American Society, and I had gone to all the little bill sales conference and sessions. So I thought of myself as being, quote, radical, but I wasn't, especially by my junior year. I was, like you said, trying to get the hell out of there and keep my grade point average. But I had a work study job in Hamilton Hall. Then I went to about 3 o'clock, and I think the takeover was going on at that time, rather. And Fred Smith tells the same story. A lot of us didn't know what was going on. We just got picked up and swept up with the movement. And that was good because we all learned a lot. And as you know, I did that film possibly out of guilt because I couldn't stay those whole times. And I've talked to one of my Barnard friends who was there, and she doesn't even want to talk about it anymore. She was so frightened. So your comment about fear, and it wasn't from guns, it was just the US with the response to Martin Luther King. She thought people were going to drop bombs on us in Hamilton Hall because we were segregated that way. So I just wanted to
And the
share
other thing, of course, is a lot of parents reeled their students back out of the fray of things as well.
Well, my mother came and got me. Okay. Okay. I was having a nervous breakdown, literally. So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah. After it happened, my father was an Episcopal minister in Charlottesville. And he went to an event at the University of Virginia, and the president of Columbia was there. And he told him, my daughter was sitting in your office. Which was a bit of an exaggeration because I was only in Hamilton Hall. And then he got fired. He lost his job after that. Yeah, but if
One point,
I think that. I think that the way that the numbers grew within Hamilton Hall was amazing because people had to make that personal, moral, spiritual decision. Am I willing to sacrifice my career and get expelled? And I can remember one of the major contribution I felt I made was recommending, after we were in there maybe a day and a half, that everyone call their parents and let them know what they were doing. And I, for one, was shocked at my father's reaction. He said, I'm proud of you, and we have to stand up to this type of nonsense. So I think many students felt not only the support from the Harlem community, but also from their families. And I have to say that there were many students that did not come in. We did not want the athletes, George Stark, McMillan. We did not, Haywood Dotson, we did not want them coming in because we knew if they had a chance at playing pro sports, that if they were labeled as a troublemaker, they would never make it. And so we did not want them to come into the building. We asked them not to do that because pro sports at that time was even more racist than it is now. In addition to that, there were many students who did not believe that they could take that chance of coming in, or whatever fear they had if they knew about the New York police, those fears were legitimate, gave us information on what was happening on campus. So that there was a network of people inside, and being present in Hamilton Hall was sort of the ultimate act of courage. But many of those students on the outside were giving us information and helping us coordinate what was going on. To go back to the point about how Hamilton Hall became an all-Black protest, it was clear that SDS had Dean Coleman in his office, and he felt trapped. In addition to that, which was kidnapping, which we were not into. Second, there were SDS students who were starting to scroll with red paint on some of the walls. And defacing the property was not Martin Luther King's civil disobedience handbook. So therefore, we felt that they were getting out of control. We smelt pot. You know, there were all sorts of things going on that we felt tracked from the protest that we wanted to take, place. And so therefore, the steering committee got together and we talked about inviting them out. And we said, your behavior, destruction of property is not what we're about. And if you can't abide by, a set of standards for this protest, then we think that you should leave. And we discussed it for about 5 minutes, and then we told them, no, we think you should leave. And we recommended that they leave. Bill Sales was the one that said, if you want to help us, go take another building. And that caused the spread of the protests to the other buildings. They took that literally. But we did not want anything to be charged against us except criminal trespass. That was it, not kidnapping. The next move, and this is when I said this was a purposeful, well thought out process all the way along the line. And everybody that entered that building and stayed had a voice in whether we stayed or whether we accepted an offer from the administration. One person could have basically deep sixed any offer that came from the university, because that's how much we were in tune with working as a group and working together. But one of the moves that was made, we went into Dean Coleman and asked him, was he hungry? Because we had lawyers working with us. And we said, if we said we're releasing you, then that basically could be used as testimony that we were holding him. And so therefore we asked him, was he hungry? And didn't he want to walk across the campus to Takeout, which was a favorite spot for food, and get something to eat? And then we thanked him for his time and wished him a good night and ushered him out the door without saying we were holding him, because SDS sort of was holding him, but we were not into that. And at that point, Hamilton Hall became an all-Black protest. And everyone that was in Hamilton Hall, the Black students who were outside of Hamilton Hall, who were supporting us and giving us information and helping us coordinate with Harlem, all of those factors were important. And I also have to say that those conservative students who felt we shouldn't have gone this far, they basically held their peace for the most part, but some of them wanted to play the role of spy on behalf of the dean and the president of Columbia University. And I know for a fact that some of those people who took on that role got what's considered the gold standard of recommendation, and that's a letter of recommendation from the dean of Columbia College. And that letter is worth admission into just about any graduate school, including Harvard Law School. And I know one of the students that took on that spy role basically went to Harvard Law School based on the letter he got from Dean Coleman. So that is how we moved from a joint operation that was focused on both the war and the gymnasium and Harlem to a protest that focused solely on Harlem. And he was given a written statement. We didn't want him making a statement about the students and our role and what our goals were and why we were there. So we wrote one out and asked them to read our statement. That would be the biggest form of support. And they did that. That's how much they were in tune with what we were doing. So each of these moves and steps were very conscious. Even the arrest and talking about the TPF, growing up and spending my summers in Harlem, I had experience with the TPF and I saw what they could do. TPF were tactical patrol officers that rotated into a neighborhood. They were not the precinct police that you knew. They were people that rotated in and they would cause havoc. They would pick people out. They would beat people up. They would arrest people for no reason. And they operated like a Gestapo. And what we heard through our social network was that the white auxiliary police, who were not trained as the regular police officers, were bragging around the city at their bars and everything else. And they were overheard by Black auxiliary police officers. And these white police officers were saying they were going to beat these students bloody. So we knew there was a high level of violence that was about to happen from these unprofessional police officers. And if I may say, one of the points that your generation is going to have to deal with is unprofessional police officers. That is still an issue for us because they do not follow any standards of training. These auxiliary police officers came in, and it's amazing to me it wasn't talked about more during Black Lives Matter protests. There's a history of police misbehavior. Columbia was one of the biggest because those police officers came on campus and beat everybody. They only students who didn't get beat were the Black students.
Black students,
But we didn't fight back.
Because when we were arrested, because they had the paddy wagons were on Amsterdam, and I remember they took us through the tunnels in Hamilton Hall. So we came up, and then I remember looking back towards Broadway, and there was a line of policemen shoulder to shoulder, and it was moving like this, and behind them was bodies. They were just going, cracking heads. And when we got into the tombs, there were kids that their heads were broken, they were bloody. And I realized one of the things that happened was this class element. The police were from working class families, and they thought the Columbia kids were rich, and they really took it out on them. It was
and they rich and ungrateful.
Even those students privileged.
They were privileged kids, And they really
took that out on. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say they pushed people through glass. Some people got pushed through the glass in Ferris Booth Hall. It was horrible.
The fact, if I could just interject, the fact that that we were not beaten, that we were not harassed, was due in large part to the political and legal community in Harlem, as well as to a cadre of Black police officers, some of whom were high-ranking police captains, and they made it their duty and their responsibility to protect us. So we were not subject to that beating because we were protected by our community.
That's true.
Legally, politically, and tactically by police officers. I've had an occasion to meet one of the officers who was there at the arrest, and he kind of recounted some of the conversations his fellow officers, Black officers, were having, where they weren't going to let it go down. They were prepared to fight for us. If it came to that.
And going back to the issue of Harlem and the police, some of the students at that time felt that Harlem was would not explode. But I can tell you, having been a teenager in the summer in Harlem, when a Black youth was beaten that went off. And the fact that Harlem was unpredictable, it was predictable in terms of police violence against youth. If we had been beaten bloody, there would have been an uprising in Harlem.
Yeah.
I can tell you that. It was not sort of this false sense of Harlem being a paper tiger. No, that was real because people's reactions in Harlem to youth being beaten, killed, was very visceral and it was very real. And this is one of the things that we emphasized to Basil Patterson, who's a friend of my wife's family. And we said, if those auxiliary white police officers come in and do damage and hurt Black students, Harlem is going to explode, and you don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
This is another point that I want to make. When the arrest took place, we had our lawyers in there saying the students will not leave unless arrested, but they are not resisting arrest. We had photographers there. We had buckets with water and towels to protect our nasal passages and mouth against the use of tear gas. The women were in the middle, the sisters were in the middle, and there were 2 rows of brothers outside of them. That was the only concession that those sisters would give us. We begged them to leave because we did not want to see them beaten or arrested. And they basically said, we are part of this, we are committed to this, we are not leaving. And the courage and the commitment that they showed throughout the entire protest was amazing to me. And I always remember their strength and their ability to say, we are not leaving. We are part of this, we are not leaving. And so I think that's another thing that has to be recognized and hasn't been given enough attention when in these retrospectives of the protest movement.
Hi. When you're speaking about the women in Hamilton Hall, I come from a background, a Caribbean background. My parents raised me to understand the problems of being Black in the States here. They were upset. They were afraid I would lose my scholarship. They were afraid I would be expelled from school. But the teachings that my father had given me was that, yes, I have to stand up to the racism in this world. And I internalized that. It gave me courage to stay there. And yet in staying there, I was sexually assaulted by one of the Black members of our group. And I was silent about it. And I was silent about it because I knew that to speak out about it would distress and draw bad attention to our movement. And so I was silent. Afterwards, I knew other women in the Panthers who incredibly horrible sexual things happened to them because of their commitment to changing this world, to standing up, to speaking our truth. I don't feel anger anymore about what happened to me in Hamilton Hall. Probably given an opportunity, I would have done it, I would do it again. However, we have to, let's not sanitize this whole episode, which is, I'm hearing it, I'm listening, and I'm feeling that's what we're doing. Yes, it took courage. Yes, it took unity, but let's also talk about how we treat each other and how the men in the movement treat the women in the movement.
Haley, I think you were getting ready to say something.
I'm really sorry to hear that happened because I know that you were there, I was there because we were fighting for equality and against injustice. This is part of my family's history and DNA. So calling home, my parents said they were proud of me and just be careful and stay the course. I didn't have anything like what you're expressing now happen, and I'm very sorry that happened to you. And I don't think it's too late to ever get resolution on something like that. I wouldn't sanitize our experience there, but I think most of us were there because we really believed in equality and justice and for the Harlem community and not to have a racist building right in our midst that had a one door like apartheid for the Black folks in the community and one for the Columbia people. But I'm really hurt to hear this.
Wow.
Haley, I believe you
We're
were
all
going
hurt to
to
hear
ask a question or make a point.
I was just gonna ask if we could talk about the role of intersectional identities in the movement. So talking about race and not race, class and gender, which has already started to be discussed. So if anyone wants to.
One piece of the class that I'll start off with is apparently as the Ivy League departments of admission got together and conferred and made a collective decision to broaden their outreach and admissions criteria to reach into the public school universe. To recruit students. Heretofore, prior to our class of 70, the normal outreach would have been to boarding schools, to prep schools, elite private schools that were the feeders of students. But not just at Columbia, but across the Ivy League and across elite, predominantly white institutions, there was a collective decision, and it could have been in reaction to the civil rights movement or whatever the prevailing mindset at the time was, to reach out into Black communities around the country to find the top students in public schooling and invite and encourage them to apply and accept them. And so when we got to Columbia, you know, we were a whole different animal from anything that they had ever seen before. And to say that our class impacted the university is an understatement. I mean, Hamilton Hall was just one of the elements, but our presence and our connections to the communities that produced us, that we brought with us, was really powerful in terms of, I guess, establishing a presence, creating solidarity amongst each other, reaching out while we were students into the communities that produced us, either through summer jobs, or going home, you know.
Voter registration drives, we registered voters.
Working in the Harlem community, tutoring, political activism. I think even Hilton Clark ran for congressman, trying to replace Adam Clayton Powell. A number of us worked on his campaign. Charlie Ranga ultimately got that seat. But, you know, there were all kinds of tentacles. And one side note, someone has mentioned that Percy Sutton and Basil Patterson, the political class in Harlem, the political leadership in Harlem, were very much connected to and in tune with us and had an eye on us. And one of the manifestations of that protest and the visibility of the Harlem students was that maybe 3, 4, 5 years later, the president of the Harlem Chamber of Commerce approached myself and a partner, and they basically gave us the Chamber of Commerce. So to the students who are there, who are present, the credential that you're going to receive out of Columbia University positions you in the minds of people you will never even know are looking at you. And it's up to you really to utilize that, not just for your personal accomplishment, but for the gains and benefits of the communities that produced you. You have that responsibility and that obligation, as well as this privilege. I would dare say that everybody who's here on this call can recount 50 years of activism and service well beyond what we experienced at Columbia. That was an opportunity for us to coalesce, but the spirit that we created as a result of that coalescing community carried us into our communities and through our entire careers, irrespective of our professions. It was burnt into our heart and our spirit that we had an obligation to serve our community. And I think everybody here took that seriously, and we're hoping, you know, that you'll do the same thing.
Speaking to the
I agree
class
very much with you, what you just said, and I applaud it in terms of taking away what I got from those moments, not only at Barnard, but in Hamilton Hall, and using it in my lifetime to build community. I'm one of the founders of the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, to which I have dedicated much of my life to create a voice for young writers and poets and artists to create and grow. But let's not lose sight of how, and I'm thinking particularly how we educate our men. How we educate our men in terms of how they treat our women. And what happened to me, as I said before, I don't look at it, I'm not angry at this person anymore. Useless to be, that makes no sense. But to make sure that going forward, this never happens to another woman, whether she be involved in campus politics or beyond. You know, we are in a stage right now where we are in the midst of a Me Too movement. Harvey Weinstein and the likes of men like that who have used their platforms to diminish a woman's life and her position. I didn't let that happen to me. And Haley, I look at you as a strong young woman moving into the future to gather your resources, to educate women that yes, we have to stand up for ourselves. We can't let this thing about silence and yes, oh, let the brothers take care of it. Oh, let the brothers forward. And that time has passed.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well taken. I wanted to add on, that's a point well taken. I wanted to add on to something that Cicero said before we get away from it, because in Paul Cronin's documentary that he did, which is very extensive, Sherry has a documentary which I think everybody should see. And it's kind of, Jimmy Bogan was telling us last night that he thought that it was a very good summation, and it was very manageable and succinct, and people can pick it up really quickly. Paul Cronin's is the opposite. It's probably about 20 hours of footage.
Yeah, it is.
It's got comments from all of us. I mean, it's a lot to listen to it. But one of the things that came out, one of the administrators mentioned that he was on the phone with the president of the university, and he told him, if you nip this in the bud, send the police in right away. Within the first 2 or 3 hours, we can squash this. But if the Black students become prominent in this, there's no way we can do this, because speaking to that climate in Harlem, they were afraid. They said that if it weren't for Black students, they would have gone into those buildings right away. We stayed a week. They even, the president of the university even made a call to Mayor Lindsay at the 11th hour after we had been there a week, saying, if you must send in the TPF, send them in and clear out all the buildings except for Hamilton Hall. Please leave those Black students alone. And Lindsay said, of course, well, I can't do that. I can't just go in and get the white people and leave the Black people. But the point is well taken, that the reason, and SDS gives us credit for this too, the reason that the protest lasted as long as it did was because of the centrality of the Black students.
Yeah.
And then to Haley's question about class, Marvin mentioned that we came together with a lot of the students of like backgrounds. We had students who were living in the Grant housing development right there at 125th and Harlem who were going to Columbia and Barnard. So we had this infusion of people from different classes. But I think that one of the things that really was outstanding is how well we worked together. A lot of those class differences were, I'm not going to minimize them. I think some of them probably were real turnoffs for some people. But again, we kind of overcame our differences. And then I think just in my personal example, in my personal case, my friends at Columbia came from all different classes, and we didn't really have any real conflict over class. We were united in our experience. It's kind of like of the mind of Malcolm X, you know, where he said, what do they call a Harvard educated Negro? And it's nigger. The same thing they call everybody. And so the treatment that we were receiving at Columbia that made us feel like the university was treating us as less than, was something that it didn't really matter what your class was. Your parents could have been doctors, lawyers. You were still treated like a nigger, just as if you had come up from Grant housing projects. There was no difference in terms of how the university saw us.
I think one of the important things for Haley and the young people there is the idea of organization and looking at your political connections or establishing those, also looking at the legal issues and the assets that you have to develop in facing the problems that you might be confronted with. And if you have that organization, then your chances of succeeding in what you're going after or pursuing as a protest or to influence the institution are much better than if you don't. And that's why I ask about a steering committee and being able to speak as one voice on those important issues, and then also mobilizing help from outside and different voices or different organizations that are not necessarily on the inside to be able to help you with influencing an institution that is very rich and very powerful. And if you remember, one of our statements for Columbia is, who owns New York? So I think you have to think about those things when you're really trying to confront some issues and cross your T's and dot your I's carefully in making your move.
And you also have to, I think it was important, we did have a list of demands. I think that one of the things that I questioned with Black Lives Matter and many of the protests with George Floyd, what are you asking for? You have to be very specific. You just can't go and protest. I think we had more Black faculty, of Afro-American history department, funding for recruitment of Black students. We had a whole list. I can't remember all of them now, but I think that in addition to the organizing and the political connections, you have to be clear about what you are asking for and what problems you want to alleviate.
Absolutely. And that came after it became a Black Hamilton Hall.
Right. One of the things I think that might be worth talking about is just how we ran the meetings, because Cicero said something about how we would, we would talk and stuff. We refused to vote. We said everything had to be by consensus. That voting made it possible for people not to made splits happen. And we used to have meetings that lasted till 2 a.m. And if somebody had an objection, we said, we would say, stand up and say what your objection is.
The
And then
Iowa
we would talk
caucuses.
it out. It took a long time, but that's the first time I've
Everybody
ever
was
been in
clear
something
in
like
the
that.
end what was going on.
That's right.
but
That's
Yeah,
right.
Everybody
yeah.
was clear.
But there were
on
a
the
lot of
same
people
page.
who weren't. They started out being provocative, and we would say, stand up and say what you want to say. We didn't tell anybody to sit down. We don't want to hear you. We said, stand up and say what you want to say. And it created an atmosphere in which people could really come together. And I thought that was very interesting. And one other thing I wanted to say, which is kind of funny, it's about Bill Sales. Bill Sales was a graduate student in poli-sci at Columbia. He loved to read about these revolutionary movements and how they negotiated. And what he did when your steering committee was meeting with the administration, he tried to do some of the things the Vietnamese were doing in their negotiations with the United States. And it was so funny because he told us about that. He said, because Emmanuel Wallerstein, one of our professors, thought he was an intermediary between the Black students and the administration. And Bill said that when he would come in and Wallerstein would say something, that you steering committee would all smile and act like you agreed with what he said. And then when you would get out, you would disagree. But it was really funny. I mean, it was kind of interesting to see some, using those kinds of tactics. And Bill was really into that. He was a real strategist. And I was trying to reach him, but I tried to text him and say, man, get on Zoom. Yeah. But he read all of that stuff about China and Vietnam and
Kissinger and
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was wonderful that we really didn't shun anyone for whatever even if they were the one person in the room who had that position. We tried to resolve everything.
Well, Ivan, can I interject a question procedurally? I'm looking at the clock and we're to be over by 8. Are we going to go to the students for questions from them? And I have one question of the leader of BOSS, and Frances is sitting there. She knows what my question is. How has that name changed once again? She in her room and me going to be a graduate student by then came up with that name, Barnard Organization of or for, which one was it?
Of Soul
Sisters. And now what does Soul Solidarity mean? Thank you, Haley, good program. I'll
Plead
talk
the
to you
fifth,
later,
I
Bob.
had nothing to do with it. And they didn't ask me, and it wasn't on them to ask me.
It was their decision.
Their organization.
It was their decision.
Changing it. What's wrong with being a sister?
The first time it's been changed.
No, it's not.
Well, there are
Barnard-
reasons to change names and to move forward in time. I mean, it's all right.
I have, my name is Hess and I'm not in that mess, but I have spoken.
I think I understand why they changed the name, but I had wanted to go back and but do you know what? I have lost my train of thought.
Oh, no.
That's what happens.
You're too young for that.
Let us move forward.
Let's go back to
Haley.
I will come back and I recall what it is that I wanted to go.
Larry's going to say something.
Let's go back to Haley.
I know what it was. Don't let me forget it again.
Okay, excuse me.
But Carolyn, it had to do what Carolyn was saying.
Yeah.
About the meetings and the structure of the meetings. I thought I was the most frightened person in that building. I thought I was the most frightened person. I thought that I was, the greatest coward, but through those meetings, I felt affirmed, I felt heard. I did not feel that I would be pushed into any action that I did not feel comfortable with. And I looking back on it, I thought, well, perhaps there was some method to the madness of sitting for hours and hashing out every decision. Perhaps this was a time, I hate to say time waster, but this was used to keep us, engaged so that we wouldn't just sort of flip out mentally. And it may have been that, but it also served to build community, to build a sense of trust over time, that no one would be rolled over, that we all had value, and that we would move through consensus. Later, I thought perhaps that some wise person had picked that up from studying SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the way they operated. I don't know if it was that or some kind of spontaneous understanding, or Bill Sales understanding international strategy. But whatever it was, it definitely helped shape me. And it helped shape generations of students that I touched in later years as a student advisor, because I helped them utilize some of the same techniques in building a sense of community to move forward. Basically against the administration of which I was a part. But I wanted them to feel a sense of solidarity.
Can we go back to can we just go back to Sherry made a point about, because of the time, to allow some of the students, if they have questions or other concerns, so we can address them before all the time is up. So we'll go to you, Haley, just to identify some.
There's a couple students here who have some questions, so I'm going to open the floor to them. You guys can come up and ask your questions, and please, when you do, introduce yourself just so they know who they're talking to. Okay.
Hello, my name is Amiri. Thank you for giving us time to talk with you. My question actually has to do with the radio station. Like, I'm just interested. I know that you mentioned like the Spectator, like how, I know that the protest and the uprising was very documented like in the media. So just what was your relationship to the media like during the actual, during the week, pretty much?
The media was not truthful.
But the radio station did broadcast.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a Zoom call.
So you heard the radio
station, WKCR broadcast. They were like covering it 24/7, and we had Kent Parker, Rashid, was working for the radio station, and he did give a number of reports to them about what was going on in Hamilton Hall, and he was very helpful actually, because there was a lot of misinformation going on about what the nature of what was happening in Hamilton Hall. There was a rumor that Hamilton Hall was really not occupied by students, that it was occupied primarily by thugs from Harlem, and that they were holding the students, they were controlling the students. And
the Mau Mau.
Yeah,
and the Mau Mau.
And so he kind of disabused them of these notions and let them know that the Black students are definitely in control. It is not outside influences, and that these ideas, these demands were being shaped through a consensus process. I know there, Plunky, you might know a little bit more because he was in your class and you were closer to him. Can you shed any light on what WKCR was doing?
I can only say, concur with what you have said already, and that is that having our own reporter on hand helped us. And to some of the earlier comments about our building of consensus, that was possible for a couple of reasons. One, because of the scale. It wasn't 1,000 people in there. It was maybe 50 to 100. So it was, I won't say easy, but it was more acceptable to try to build that consensus, not with a representative democracy, but a true democracy. But having Ken Parker there, Rashid there, gave us a reporter on the scene, and nothing about that experience was totally 100% without opposition. There were people who were concerned about him giving reports as if that wasn't a good thing, as if that he was a spy, that he was putting out information. That wasn't a widespread view, but that is just to say that when you have gatherings of people, you're often going to have divergent views.
Yeah.
And so that has to be accounted for. And sometimes the only way to do that is through time and allowing those views to be expressed. So to your point about the Mau Mau, Arnhem, and the idea of outside agitators, that was a very prominent viewpoint being expressed in the mainstream press.
Yeah.
That was being run by, well, when H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael showed up, they had a national reputation. And so it was thought that now this concept of the outside agitator was something that had to be knocked down. And the idea that when the cops came, that they would be particularly harsh on anybody who was not a student. Even in those negotiations for concessions about amnesty, it was said aloud that might be true for students, but anybody who was not an official student would not get any kind of
dispensation.
Yeah, and so and not everybody in the building was a student. I had officially left student that left the, school that January, so I was concerned that I'd be considered an outside agitator.
Sure.
I was politically active and no longer a student, so I had no right to be on campus, end quote. So
yeah. All right, can we go back to you, Haley? You had some other students, right?
Yes. Next student.
Hey, good evening to all of you. I want to thank you. I'm actually not a student. I'm Dr. Jonah Mixon Webster. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here in African American Studies. I just had a question. I know we don't have a time machine, but considering issues of accountability and care for the violences that can happen within the movement, and care for those who have experienced violence within the movement, what would be some provisions if we could go back? If you all could go back, what would be some of those provisions that you feel like you all would possibly want to have in place to ensure that parties are held accountable for any violences that are wrought within the movement, and those who are rendered vulnerable, there is a cadre of care for them as well, if that makes sense. Because also I'm thinking about, in our present movements, our present day movements, those same violences are occurring. So how do we, in the present and moving into the future, learn from what you all have done in the past? And if you could go back, what provisions for accountability and care would there be, and should there be now?
Well, if I could just, start that, I think there's obviously a history of what is now called toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
In amongst the leadership cadre of almost every organization, the presumption being that men are naturally the leaders of these groups, and that women should naturally assume subordinate positions. So I think one of the first things is to kind of disabuse ourselves of that notion. Any organization that is functioning and operating and sustaining itself is only doing so because of the energy and the spirit of Black women. Okay. In terms of accountability, I think this Me Too movement has provided perhaps the best antiseptic, which is transparency. I think women now have a voice where they will more willingly and vociferously speak up. And I think to some extent out of fear or cowardice, or hopefully at some point common sense and sensitivity, human sensitivity, their voices are being heard, they're being listened to, and there is accountability. you know, one thing I would say about your experience on campus is that it's a kind of a social laboratory. And in this environment, in the years that you are there together, there's the opportunity, whether you do it purposefully or it's accidentally, social relationships and maturation will occur. Perspectives of who you are as a man and a woman will occur. Who you are is in relation to each other will occur.
Yeah.
And what I would ask and suggest is that these be some forthright and open conversations, and that it not be just left to what you are gleaning from the cultural environment that produced you, that you have an opportunity there to bring some clarity to some of these issues. I make the remark that, you know, when I went into Hamilton Hall, my perspective on the women who were there, the female students, was that they were chicks, you know, more or less objects to me. But it was my experience there, living with them and engaging with them in that process, that gave me an understanding and a level of respect and appreciation such that any organizational project that I work in or have worked in, I insist on women being in leadership roles. There's an insight that I got indirectly through Carlos Moore, who was a protege of Cheikh Anta Diop. And he said, basically, every function of culture and society and civility that matters is under the purview of women. And the only role that men bring to the table is sports, war, and chaos.
So I'd like to jump in for a second, Marvin, and just say, my experience was a little different, as you know, because you know my mom, you knew my mom.
Yeah.
And so I was raised by a very strong Black woman and a very strong Black man. And so where I got a lot of my perspective was at home. And, you know, with my mother, one of her best friends was Dr. Margaret Burroughs. Another good friend was Gwendolyn Brooks. I mean, I was raised in a home where women they held the place of honor. I mean, my grandmother, what she says went. And I think that a lot comes from us really getting to know each other, really getting to care about each other, because these senses of responsibility and accountability come based on our respect and understanding of each other. And so I think a lot of it comes to, you know, you have to raise children to be sensitive, caring individuals and confident individuals. If that should be something that's a goal. Not everybody's going to have the benefit of that type of upbringing, but I think that we have to kind of stress this as our common values in our community.
Absolutely.
But understanding that the greatest impact is going to come when people are getting this kind of sensitivity toward each other in the home.
Right. Okay, Haley, was there someone else? I thought there was another student.
Do you want to speak to that? The person that asked the question asked if some of the women could speak to that question themselves.
I regret my silence for so many years. And you talk about male toxicity. There's a certain kind of training too that women have received that allows that to happen. No more. And we have to go forward understanding it's incumbent on both sexes to be transparent and to be in dialogue with each other about our equal responsibilities.
Interesting.
As a woman.
One of the.
Cicero, let Donna speak, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, I just think that as a woman, my experiences have been very diverse. But in Hamilton Hall, we had a mission. And I focused on the mission. I thought my sisters were focusing on the mission, the brothers were. I happened to be one of those taking notes or had certain responsibilities for the group. Also, former secretary for SAS. But I remember having that common goal was above everything else. I wasn't afraid to speak out, but it was a time when men, you know, thought that they were to be in charge, but not all of them thought that way. And I think we got to know each other and respect each other, men and women, girls and boys. If you guys were boys at that time, I don't know if you were or not. I think you were young men. And we were young women, but we got to respect each other, know each other, and hold each other up. But my sisters, I was right there with them. You know, I felt very comfortable, not comfortable sleeping on the floor on sleeping bags or blankets, whatever we had, but comfortable knowing that they had my back and I had their backs.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
I guess my question was more like, I know this work can be like really mentally, emotionally, like physically taxing. And it becomes really hard to like draw a line between what you can give and like how much you can do, like your capacity when it comes to these movements. And it gets hard to say no, and you want to keep going because you want to help yourself and you want to help the people around you. So I guess like my question is like, how do you sustain yourself and how do you like get out of this intoxicating cycle of like continuously doing the activism, doing the work, and then like not reaping the rewards? So how do you like, I don't know, like how do you take care of yourselves? How do you make sure you don't reach a point of burnout that you can't get back from? Make sure you don't reach a point of burnout that you can't get back. Make sure you don't reach a point of burnout that you can't get back.
One suggestion.
Burnout that you can't.
One suggestion. Are we good now?
I think so.
Okay, one suggestion is to find, as you going into the world, you're going to discover this duality. You're going to have to get a job that will sustain you and your family. That job will not necessarily correlate to your activism or your passion or your interest, but that is absolutely necessary to secure your financial stability and provide for your family. My suggestion would be to find the one thing, the one area, first of all, that you're passionate about, and then find a vehicle, either an organization, a process, a thought process within that discipline that really you feel passionate about, and focus your energy there. And it should be something that you love. You know, I'm not a strong advocate of the struggle. The work that I do for the community, for me, is recreation. I enjoy it. It gives me energy. It charges my spirit. I also do other work that I have to do to earn a living. I've been fortunate in being able to organize that in a way that it is not toxic or draining, but I know that that is not the work that sustains and uplifts my community. So it's that balance. But this process of struggle, of overcommitment, of overexertion, of continuous struggle and fight and commitment will drain you. So you need to find something that you're passionate about, but that also sustains you, that gives back to you through satisfaction, through accomplishment, through being able to see the impact of your service and your work, that it does not become a continuous drain. And the other thing is, do not jump at a point, avoid issue hopping and protest jumping. There will always be another hot button issue that emerges that, everybody's going to blow the horn and all the troops charge and protest and demonstrate and this, that, and that. Find your lane as soon as you can, be clear about it, and stay in your lane.
I would also add, you don't have to do it by yourself. My sisters have sustained me through these past 50 years. It's important that you connect with people who feel as strongly as you do about the things that you love, the things that make you happy, and that even those people who don't agree with you, you have to continue to talk with them. Nothing gets solved by digging your heels in and never knowing what the other side really thinks. So we
Or
have
trolling people.
Yes.
It's gotten really toxic.
It's persuasion and understanding that we're looking for.
Right.
You don't have to agree with me, but I just want to understand what you don't, what is it that you don't agree with? What are your bottom line issues? And also in a movement, there's coalition building. You don't have to agree on everything, but you all can work together on the thing that you do agree on. And those are the things that help build resilience for you.
For me,
I think
I'd like to add something if I may. The first is that Columbia has changed radically in the past 50 years. Half the degrees given in Columbia College are given to women. So the strength of women is much more pronounced, powerful, whatever. And I think that sort of makes a difference in the choices that are made at the university. Second thing is that Columbia has not stopped bigfooting people in terms of acquiring property, pushing folks into directions that they don't want to go in. One thing that the present students should do, I think, is focus on the fact that they have power to help the next generation. One of the things that came out of Hamilton Hall was students becoming more active. There's a couple of guys started a foundation and they were bringing people onto campus. Other folks were getting more involved with Upward Bound and Double Discovery. And I think that whatever you do in terms of political, your political orientation or framework or point of view, that you need to always remember that there are a bunch of kids out there. Columbia's got this super new campus that you wouldn't believe.
I know.
Up on 125th Street.
Yeah.
And Broadway. The subway stop that was forbidden for you to go to.
Yeah.
They have this massive glass and steel campus up there. And on one side is the Manhattanville projects. And on the other side is the grand housing that was mentioned earlier. And I think that Columbia is just as avaricious, greedy, whatever word you want to use, acquisitive. And one of the things that you have to do as students is to remember that you have a duty and obligation to help the next generation. All right, so I'm going to stop there.
All right. I think we've got the time. I don't know.
Let me speak. I don't think that we spoke to the young man.
Bogan. We only have a short amount of time. I don't know where Zoom is to 8 o'clock. So I want to yield to Haley what other comments she has if she wants to wrap up.
But we're
whatever.
talking about students and their
I
time
understand, Bogan.
and their graduation. We didn't address that.
Bogan.
Yeah, we
All right.
can't address
It's their
everything.
program.
No, but we've got to have them succeed. They've got to graduate.
We need a part two. We
Part,
need
yes.
a part two.
All right, Haley.
Would you guys be open to answering one last question and then we'll go into wrap ups?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Bogan?
No, let her ask the question.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Lucia. I served both on BOSS and the Caribbean Students Association, and I'm writing my senior thesis on Black women who work as 911 dispatchers. And part of what I'm studying is just how complex that relationship is, specifically between Black people and NYPD. So I kind of just wanted to ask you guys more of, what was it when you were arrested by Black police officers? Did that feel safer, or how did, just in general, what were your feelings towards the Black police presence while these protests were happening?
Cops is cops.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know.
maybe I can try a hand at that, since part of my work in community development was the nexus between community economic development and policing. And one of the things that you'll find out about many Black patrol officers and upper level folks is they took that job to protect their community. And many times they do not have the opportunity to actually coordinate and talk with the community about the threats that are there. And I think that the dialogue between Black police officers, if you look at the Black Patrolmen's Association, I think that would be a deep well of information for your thesis. You can call them and they can help you with that. But in most cases, if there is a dialogue between the community group and activist group and local precinct officers who are minority, but in particular Black, you will find that there's a lot of common ground and a lot of good work that can be done. One neighborhood in Washington, D.C. was able to lower their murder rate by 95% because of the coordination with Black police officers. So you need to really think in terms of, these are members of our community who have chosen law enforcement as a way to serve the community. Not all of them fit that pattern. Some of them are just as brutal as their white counterparts because they adopted those standards. But for the most part, you have many Black patrol officers and those in leadership position who see their job as protecting community. The problem is they need to talk to the community about the best ways to do that. And the dialogue is missing. We don't give them the opportunity to talk to us. They're usually sent out as the token, not as a negotiator. And one thing that Hamilton Hall did was put them in the catbird seat, put them in control, because we would not deal with white leadership within the police department. We wanted to deal with Black leadership within the police department. That makes a difference when the community speaks out and asks for our representatives in law enforcement to have a voice in what's happening, because that generally is where things go sideways, is the Black patrol officers are ignored.
Thank you. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who came today. It was a wonderful opportunity to foster these connections between current Black students here on campus and the alum of Columbia. So I want to thank you guys for showing up, both people on Zoom and people in person. So give a round of applause for yourself. Thank you to everyone for sharing and being vulnerable. It's so important that these stories are preserved and passed on. So again, thank you so much for everyone who came and participated. So yeah, good night, everyone. I hope you have a nice night, and everyone please stay safe.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining in.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haley, for organizing this.
Right.
Yes, thank
Good to
you.
see you guys.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.
It was good to see everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Soon in the real world, I hope.
Someday soon, someday soon.
Yes.